Hello and welcome to the Quilnook Experience. This is your host, Tristan Roberts of Quilnook Farm, and I'm talking today with Sage Mason. I've known Sage for a little over a year. Sage is in law school at Washington University in St. Louis. Uh, but other than that, Sage, how would you introduce yourself?
Um, yeah, I guess that's how I would introduce myself at this point in time. Um, I woofed at Quill Nook Farm, though I don't think that was the name of the farm when I was there. Um, but yeah, that's how I met Tristan. Um, that was during a year I took between undergrad. I went to Emory University for undergrad in Atlanta, and now I'm in law school. I'm originally from New York City, and I went to Tristan's rival high school. So that kind of drew us together when I was deciding what I wanted to do during that year off.
Was that helpful in taking that time that you took away from school? Was that intentional, or sort of in retrospect, was it helpful for you I mean, you said you'd had adjustments periods. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, I think it was helpful. Uh, I wish I would have taken a gap year before I went to college because it affected a lot of my relationships. Um, I think it was an extremely important thing to do. Probably the best, most influential year of my life was the year I took off.
What was the what was so impactful about that gap year itself?
I don't know. I'd say I guess yeah we're gonna talk about race a little bit later, um, but throughout my childhood, and I was raised by a single mom in East Harlem, New York. My mom kept me pretty on a tight leash, like pretty sheltered. Um, like I felt pretty involved in my community. All of my extracurriculars were in Harlem, um, but my mom just tried to keep me away from some of the negative aspects of Harlem, um, and wanted to protect me from just some of the things that a lot of young black men fall into. Um, and as a result, like I didn't know what like freedom was, um, and maybe I still don't. I don't know. Law school is kind of like the antithesis of freedom, um, but
Is your mom happy that you're in law school?
yeah, my mom is amazing. She loves that I'm in law school. She loves that. She'd be happy if I wasn't in law school. She just wants me to be happy. But I think she's especially proud that I'm wanting to do this, and that it's working out so far.
Wow, congratulations! And I'm happy that you went for that, and also happy that you didn't. I mean, I think you gave yourself some benefit of time there, and not sort of rushing into. Oh, I need to get this done by October, November. Like you thought about it, took your time, and then things they responded. They liked your application, which makes sense to me.
Yeah, I think I did kind of rush, but yeah, it was like a low pressure rush because I was like, I need to get this in before the deadline. But if I don't, I'll apply next year.
Can I ask you a question? I'm just asking this as kind of a factual question, not sort of like taking sides or anything. Do you think like you got a more of a look from them being a black man?
Um, yeah, definitely. I think um, every school I think that's just a fact. There's like a term in like the law school application process, which is like underrepresented minority. Um, in the legal profession, I think African Americans make up maybe like 7% of lawyers, maybe 8%, and we are something like 12 or 13% of the general population. That has pretty bad consequences, just in terms of how powerful the legal system is and how much certain implicit biases affect outcomes. If there's an underrepresentation of any minority group, it's just going to result in that group um, being disenfranchised, having less power as the nation sort of progresses and continues to form laws.
I think I'm just going to take a stab at articulating something, and I'm not trying to be controversial here, but I'm just trying to articulate I think, a sort of an unspoken issue that I'm aware of. I feel as though, well, let's take I don't know this. I don't know where affirmative action stands today. It seems like has been kind of rolled back or sort of defeated politically in a lot of places. So frankly, I don't know where that stands. But let's just sort of say any sort of attention to identity in the admissions process. I think you've just made a good case for why that's important. Um, I would say, I would just say personally, I mean, I have a little discomfort with it personally because to me, the sort of the solution to identity holding people back in the long run shouldn't be the focus on identity. Um, but maybe we need to do this now to even things out and to get the representation of our diverse population. As you said, as your generation ages or matures, maybe things will change. Maybe these types of incentives will be phased out or morph into something else. I don't know, but I don't know if there's a question in there, but your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think that's like too controversial of a view. I think a lot of people share that perspective. Um, it's interesting, something like 20 years ago, I think Sandra Day O'Connor wrote in an opinion. She set like an expected like 21 year or 23 year time period on when she thought it would no longer be necessary to have affirmative action in certain like college admissions. Um, and right now we're sort of approaching that point. I think that's just not the reality in America today. And I don't think, 21 years of affirmative action in college admissions is going to solve the historical injustices that resulted in, certain populations, certain demographics being uh, sort of held down. I think it takes a certain degree of privilege for people to even access the opportunities that affirmative action affords. Like where I grew up in Harlem, most people can't benefit from affirmative action because they're not even applying to certain schools that would take that sort of thing into consideration. They're just they just graduate high school and they start working, um, if they can even do that. So I don't think that's the solution. I think it is a good thing to have, for all of the reasons that people argue that it is a good thing. Um, and I also think that identity is important, especially in America. So while I think it's not so great that a lot of people who may have benefited from affirmative action, myself included, maybe arrive at, some school sort of with this cloud hanging over them that's like, oh, maybe you got in because you were black. I think it is net positive, especially if, once we're in an institution that maybe we would have previously been barred from, we excel, and we show that, we're doing just as good, if not better, than, you guys that are already here. And we are, an extraordinary benefit to the community. What I was saying earlier about Clarence Thomas is that Clarence Thomas has the opposite view, where he says that the biggest mistake he's made was going to Yale Law School, which took him, so he says, because he was black, and they had like a quota they needed to meet in the early 70s. But I also think if Clarence Thomas did not go to Yale Law School, he probably wouldn't be on the Supreme Court right now.
Do you feel like you have a cloud over you that maybe you have something to prove, and does that affect does that motivate you, or do you feel like it affects your behavior or your psychology?
Um, yes, and yes, and yes. Stacey Abrams had a quotation I really liked. It was something like many people who have been underestimated, I have learned to overperform. whether people say it or not, like you just asked me, though you're probably just more open with me and in general than most people would be. Um, but like you asked me when we started talking about this, do I think that being black like helped in the admissions process? The answer is probably yes. Um, though a lot of people probably wouldn't admit that. Uh, so I think that's evidence of sort of a cloud hanging over me, that people may think that. And as a result, and I think also that's just sort of life being a black man in America. Like, there are a lot of clouds hanging over me. The threat of, maybe people being afraid of me just because I'm, walking uh, towards them at night on my way home, or the police being more likely to shoot me um, because they see something I'm doing that would not raise any sort of suspicion or alarm if a white person was doing the same thing. They see that as a threat. Um, so I think that's just sort of the nature of being black in America. But as a result of
That just
that, it
that
makes
sounds so
me.
brutal, Sage.
Yeah, it is brutal. You know, Inequality is bad,
I
injustice
don't
is
think
bad.
it's
But it makes me want to do really well. Um, so it motivates me not only to sort of break stereotypes, defy stereotypes, and uh, overperform to sort of change people's minds and disprove whatever assumptions they make. Um, but also, just I want to do really well for my own sake, to be like, you see what I did, you counted me out, and now I'm winning.
yeah, a life well. I think there's a quote: "A life well lived is the best revenge," something to that effect. And I think if you have a mindset of you're proving something to someone else, that gets to a point in life where you're limited by your choices, maybe more in relation to someone else's perspective versus what's true for you. But it does feel good to kind of overachieve when someone else counted you out. I can agree
I
with
wouldn't
that.
say I've like
You're making me
overachieved.
realize
I,
this,
I
Sage.
just mean in general, like small victories. Um, they feel good.
Any victory. Well, you're a very intelligent, hardworking individual. You're at a respected university doing law. You're doing well. Um, I don't know if you're overachieving. Maybe you're achieving. Maybe you're underachieving for all I know. But it's impressive in the general population to see where you're at.
Yeah, I'm just happy to be able to be doing what I want to be doing right now. Um, I think that is success in my book. But there are a lot of other people who are also doing what I'm doing at the same time. So just sort of defying maybe some assumptions that they come in with is a victory for me.
Nice job. You're making me realize. I think I have a cloud over myself. Speaking of prep school, I went to Andover, as we talked about. My I had I was like top. I was the valedictorian in my class in seventh, eighth, ninth grade. Um, so I kind of had the grades, had the essay recommendations to, I'd say, be deserving of a spot in a top prep school. I'm sure it also helped. I know it helped because at that time, Andover now has need blind admission, but at that time, ability to pay was a factor in tuition, and my grandparents did pay my full tuition there. So I would say I had just privileged access by way of my grandparents were white and had good jobs. My grandfather had a good job, saved money, invested in General Electric stock, and that was a unearned, to me, unearned
Yeah, I think
factor in going to this
you're definitely
prestigious school.
privileged. I remember you telling me about your grandpa and GE, and my immediate assumption. was like, oh, okay, that's why he has this farm and is doing really well. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, when my grandparents died, they left money to their grandkids, and that was kind of the chunk of money. Ended up spending about $192,000 to buy this land here, which was directly from my grandparents and directly from my grandfather, who was born in 1901 in England, raised in Canada, went to Queen's University in um, Canada, became an electrical engineer, recruited by GE, spent his entire career at GE, bought stock the whole time he was there. Didn't own any other stock but GE stock, but
it was
that
a
was
good
a
time to
historically good time to do
own
that.
GE stuff.
Yeah, so he kind of lucked out on that, I would say, but also um, what. So for me, that was sort of really an unearned privilege, and I had a lot of mixed feelings about that, especially, and I've written about this elsewhere, but I grew up on a farm that was right on the banks of the Hudson River in a hot spot of pollution from a General Electric factory upriver. So even though I grew up on the Hudson River, never went swimming in it, canoeing, anything like that. It smelled weird. Um, and when pretty early on in my adult life, I decided I wanted to buy land and wanted to create a farm and, basically do what I'm doing now. And in my mind, there is a sort of a exchange of, okay, I'm going to cash in this General Electric stock, which was got its value in part from polluting the environment, exploiting workers, and invest in something different, invest in something where I'm going to try to have a more connected relationship to the land and to the people that I encounter here. So you can't really just take off privilege. You can't privilege is with you whether or not you want it. Just as you're walking down the street at night and you're being a black man is part of your identity, whether or not it's feels good at that time to be um, seen in that way. So I think it's what we do with it, perhaps, which is the choice that we have.
Yeah, I think part of it, and I think what you've done with the farm is really beautiful, and I admire sort of the way you're living your life. Um, I could definitely imagine myself doing the same thing um, if I'm able to afford something like that. Um, but I don't think you need to be ashamed of the money you have, or sort of the benefit you had from what your grandparents did. I think that's something you should uh, kind of be entitled to. But I also think, and I think it's great that you're doing something that is uh, a benefit more so than maybe GE was doing. Um, so the fact that you're just like a good person uh, helps definitely, rather than sort of contributing to some of the problems that exist today. Though there are many ways in which you probably are contributing to some problems. Many ways in which I am contributing to some problems in society, um, and that's just sort of the nature of life. Uh, but that you have a good outlook, I think, is really important, um, and that you're trying to do the right thing. Um, and again, like you shouldn't be ashamed of your privilege. Um, but I think it's important to work not to push yourself down, but to lift other people up, so that others might be able to,
Hmm.
buy a farm of their own one day. Because I don't think there's a. I'm not an economist, um, but I'm pretty optimistic in saying, you don't have to lose what you have in order for other people to gain. I think everybody can succeed together. Uh, Michelle Obama had a quote in her book. The message was, you rise the most when you lift others up rather than pushing them down.
I agree.
yeah, I think you're helping to do that sort of thing.
Well, thanks for saying that and reflecting that. And I know you also hold me accountable if you see me doing something different. I want to shift to kind of a story that you and I both have had a role in and had a lot of conversation about. Will you just tell me what happened after we were insulating the floor here in the wood shop? I was in the joist in the floor with my arm over my head, kind of pushing on this tamper, and my shoulder popped out, dislocated. Um, you helped me put on some clean clothes and then drive me to the ER, drop me off, and what did you do next?
Um, well, I was gonna wait in the ER, but you insisted that I, kind of roam around a little bit. But yeah, I was just walking around Brattleboro, and then I came across the Civil War monument, sort of on the outskirts of whatever the main street is.
Yeah, it's on the Brattleboro Common.
But yeah, I was just attracted to the beauty of it. I was walking around, and then I, went up to the Civil War monument, which was sort of like the centerpiece of that whole sort of front area. Um, and I thought it was really nice, but then I looked at the plaque on the front, and it reminded me of I took this class my senior year at Emory called Race, Gender, and Visual Representation, and we talked about how um, a lot of statues in the United States that depict sort of like emancipation, um, and also some Confederate statues down in the South, but I think primarily statues sort of glorifying the North's role in the Civil War and freeing the slaves will have something like Abraham Lincoln or like a Union general standing with like a Confederate soldier surrendering to him, and then like a enslaved person kneeling down, um, sort of in like a submissive position, and how that's controversial because it sort of reinforces notions of white supremacy, and this white savior idea. So I took a picture of that. I don't think I said anything to you right away, but I noticed it. And then I went back. I got you from the ER a couple hours later, um, and we went on with life. Um, but then I was reading a couple weeks after I left the farm. I was reading an article about a similar statue in Boston that I forget if it was removed or if people were protesting it.
I believe it was taken down.
There's a similar one that's in front of the Natural History Museum in New York City. There's a big statue of Teddy Roosevelt. It's like the centerpiece in front of the entrance of the Natural History Museum. Like huge deal. I think it was also in the movie Night at the Museum, because Robin Williams plays Teddy Roosevelt riding around on a horse. Um, and on that statue there was Teddy Roosevelt, and then there was a Native American person, and then an African American person, sort of in like a similarly, just not put on a pedestal. But yeah, I saw an article that like the one in Boston was taken down, and then I texted you about it, and I just brought it to your attention that the one in Brattleboro is similar, and then you started doing some really great stuff with it.
I think I took note of it when you texted that to me, and it might have not been until, I mean, that was last fall, late or winter, ultimately. It wasn't until just pretty recently, a few months ago, that I went there with Felix and we really talked about it and put some googly eyes on it. And Felix and I literally took the posture of all the different figures. There's a figurative lady kind of seeing the future. There's the two soldiers. There's the soldier up on top, who's a Union, the Confederate and Union soldiers standing. And then there's the enslaved or newly freed black man who's kneeling. I've taken a position on this which is different from some of the other people I know, and I want to get your take on it. And I know you won't just blow smoke up my ass. Be honest. The there has been dialogue about this statue in Brattleboro, and that dialogue has focused on the statistics on the statue. That there's a plaque that names how many Union soldiers were from Vermont that fought in the war, how many died, and through historical research, it's been determined that a lot of black soldiers, black men who fought for the Union, fought for the freedom of African Americans, were left off of those statistics. And people have researched that and suggested there's now a new sort of a plaque, an interpretive plaque that is proposed to be added to that area, which would kind of correct those statistical wrongs and sort of describe the process, describe the context a little bit in which the statue was originally put up and what we know today. And I applaud that. I think that's a huge step forward. To me, though, I have kind of kept my criticism up of the town for this statue. And to me, the imagery is more important, as important and more important in some way than the statistics. As in my view, you're a young black man walking through Brattleboro. There aren't that many statues of public art in Brattleboro, and perhaps the only one or one of the only ones that shows a black man shows him kneeling in this subservient position. We're being saved by these white dudes, one of which is a Confederate soldier that same black dude in history might have been fighting against and defeated in battle. And now he's sort of depicted kneeling, receiving his freedom from these two white dudes who are standing above him. Brains, our bodies are very visual, very somatic, where you're a young black man, you see this, whether or not you read the words on the plaque, and I'd say the words are less likely to be read than the images. That's just, again, the nature of things. We're a very image-focused people. We see things and process them at light speed compared to reading words. I think that imagery is harmful in the present day, and I'm an advocate for either removing it or adding imagery, adding more statues of diverse people doing diverse things that are more appropriate, more aspirational to being a free individual person versus receiving your freedom from someone else. Do you feel it's hurtful, like walking by, just encountering that image? Do you have any sort of just somatic response to it?
I was disappointed when I saw it, because like I went to college in the South. Yeah, there were a bunch of Confederate monuments. I was surrounded by that stuff when I was in undergrad. The campus was used as a Confederate hospital during the Civil War. There's a Confederate cemetery on campus. Like, you walk out of the gym, you walk in the woods like 100 feet, and there's just a bunch of Confederate graves and a little statue that says, like, "Our fallen soldiers." Eventually, when the Union defeated the South, it changed hands, and the Union Army used that campus as a hospital. But like Emory sort of gave resources to the Confederacy during the Civil War. When I went to Atlanta for my junior and senior year at Emory, there was another Confederate statue. That statue was taken down my senior year because it did not align with the values of the town. But when I went up north in New York, I don't think there are any Confederate monuments. I might be wrong about that. The controversy in New York isn't about Confederate monuments. It's about Teddy Roosevelt on a horse next to a black guy and a Native American person.
Well, and I think an important part of this for me as I researched this is the North may not have monuments to the Confederacy in the way that the South does, but the monuments in the North are explicitly designed from a point of view of welcoming the South back into the Union at the end of the war. And in Lincoln's second inaugural address, he talked about, he used the words charity for all, malice toward none. He was looking ahead to reunification and wanting I think wisely. I don't think this was a necessarily a negative intention, but how to bring the South back into the Union, which the whole point of the war for Lincoln was not to abolish slavery; it was to preserve the Union. I mean, if you read his entire second inaugural address, which doesn't take very long to read, it mentions freed slaves, but then spends most of the time talking about our sort of brothers from the South who worship the same God as we do. The scene that is depicted on the statue in Brattleboro reflects this, where the Confederate and the Union soldier are eye to eye. The Union soldier is giving the freedom to the slave, but the Confederate soldier is sort of right there. You can almost see them both giving that freedom together. And to my eye, this is not unique to me. I've read about this, but to my eye, this is a segue to Reconstruction and the Jim Crow era. Slavery might have been abolished, but then other things were put in, power structures were put in place that were just as bad or even worse in some cases. And that's what that statue depicts. And that's Lincoln's vision for reunifying. And it is explicitly a racist thing where we're going to make the white people of the leadership of the Confederacy, the leadership of the South, feel comfortable. Yeah, we freed the slaves, but we don't want them to feel too uncomfortable with the power structure being overturned. That's part of our history, right? We're not going to just forget that. But we still see that today as how we relate to each other in structural racism. And it needs to be explicitly and clearly revisited and rethought, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's exactly why I was disappointed to see something like that in Brattleboro. Because, I just thought the North would be different. And then I go to Brattleboro walking around and I see something that reminds me of just the same foundation of the problems in the South were. But what you just said, it makes sense. I don't think it was a priority for the Union right away at the end of the war to make the South feel quote unquote comfortable. I think right off the bat, like they said no Confederates in like government, they can't hold any positions in the state legislature, no positions in federal government. They created the Freedmen's Bureau, abolished slavery, of course, that plunged much of the South into poverty for a generation. But then, just over time, a lot of those, attacks on the South and useful things to bring about a semblance of, just to help out, some of the former slaves, sort of dissipated, and then they were left with a structure in which the white people who had previously enslaved them were cast back into an almost unchecked power balance.
I'd have to check my history on this, but my recollection from my high school history class was that there was in the maybe say about the 10 or 15 years after the end of the war, there were a lot of black congressmen, black senators, a lot of freedom and power for blacks, and then that changed, and then we went into the Jim Crow era. Didn't start right after the Civil War. It started maybe a couple decades after, and then things really plunged into the depths of segregation, and you didn't see representatives in the U.S. Congress or Senate so much for quite a while, and still to this day, some Senate seats have been white continuously from that time.
Yeah, I think the first black senator was in 1870, Hiram Revels, in Mississippi. And then I think there were a couple more federal legislatures who were black that were appointed by sort of the Union Army in the North. But then once Jim Crow came in and the Union Army left the South, the white people came in and just intimidated black people, despite the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, into not being able to vote and not really having very much civil equality at all. I mean, obviously the effects are still present today, but really until the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Like, can you imagine like a black senator from Mississippi in 1870? Like, but that was the reality. Like,
But it was a brief reality, as you just recounted. So this there was some news this week. Black Lives Matter was removed from Amazon Smiles list of approved charities. I believe there's about $60 million in donations that they've not accounted for, that the organization has been asked for, and I believe that was the reason specifically to Amazon removing that. First of all, interesting commentary that it was the Amazon Smile piece of this that made the headline happen. Interesting how sort of a private industry, private company can make a headline like that. But I'm curious, Black Lives Matter has been such a big presence as an organization, as a movement in the last few years. Do you have any observations on it in the last few years or today to share?
um, I was talking to a friend about Black Lives Matter a week or two ago. A lot of people sort of attack the people who became the leaders of the movement by saying that they like purchased expensive houses for themselves, and that you just mentioned there's quite a bit of money that's been unaccounted for. Um, those things obviously aren't good, and I think they also make the movement look bad. Um, but when I think about Black Lives Matter, uh, I think about the idea, and I think that idea started. I mean, the idea should have been present forever, um, and it was for me. But I think a major point was Trayvon Martin's death, killing, and it just sort of brought uh, this injustice to the forefront. And I think it was a successful movement in that it got people talking, got people thinking about things that just weren't really at the forefront of the political discourse. And I think what will survive, even though now there are these attacks on sort of the organization, um, what will endure is the idea uh, that there was this injustice, and we ought to do what we can to remedy it. Um, and I think that's a good thing.
What do you think of the slogan Black Lives Matter? And I'll just give you a little perspective that I have. I'm curious if you can speak to this or just your own feelings. But I've heard some people say that the slogan is a bad one, that um, like it's not a goal of a life to matter. Like a goal of a life might be to thrive, to succeed, to prosper. Um, and sort of in using the slogan Black Lives Matter, it's an incredibly low bar.
Yeah, well, I think any slogan that people like know about is a successful slogan. Um, I also think that criticisms that it is a really low bar. That's kind of the point of it. The bar is pretty low. Like all we are asking for is like just acknowledge that our lives matter as much as anybody else's life. I mean, this isn't really what we're talking about, but to be opposed to that is as if, and this also isn't like the most common criticism, but it's almost as if to say like, no, actually, they don't matter.
Yeah, it's not a big ask. And I think we've all seen this in one way or another, where someone feels like they need to state Black Lives Matter. They need to say it in order to have a respectable viewpoint in society. The extent that there's some obligation to say that and to put that in their bio, do you think that's doing good, or is there any harm in that? Or
Um, I haven't decided how I feel about that, honestly. Um, I personally get conflicted about a lot of stuff like that. Um, like a couple days ago, I noticed this is kind of I'll circle back to your question specifically, but there are these like handbags called I think it's Telfar. I'm not into fashion that much, but there's like a company started by a black guy. I think his last name is Telfar, um, and he makes these bags. And these bags initially were really popular in the black community, and then like many things that get sort of appropriated. Now I see these bags being worn, by lots of white people. A lot of friends of mine on Instagram and Facebook and in real life who are white have these bags. And initially, I, even though I have like very little interest personally in people's handbag choice, initially I was like, oh, they're taking our thing. Like that's, those are our bags almost. Like classic cultural appropriation. And then I thought about it a little bit more. And then I changed my sort of attitude towards it. It's not like they stole the idea, but, isn't it nice that they're buying this product that this black guy made? Like, we were advocating for, like, in the summer of 2020, everybody was like, support black-owned businesses. This is what that is, so it would be sort of hypocritical and not very smart of me to now be like, oh, they're taking our thing, even though, they're really supporting it. And I think it's great that Mr. Telfar, is now being successful. So similarly, with like this Instagram Black Lives Matter thing, and just sort of like performative activism in general, I'm torn because I think about, like I recently reread Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail, which I think everybody should read multiple times, probably like once a year, honestly. And he says that the greatest threat is not the Klansman or the guy the racist in the South. The greatest threat to progress is the white moderate, somebody who you go and you say, hey, we need justice now, and they say, I support you. I just think we should do it by different means, or we should do it over time. Because to say that is to almost like slap you in the face, and it gives this it puts somebody else's freedom, somebody else's justice on a timeline set by the person who is contributing to their oppression in the first place. It's just also being an oppressor, just in like a doing it with a smile maybe. And so I think about like these people with Black Lives Matter in their Instagram bio, but they might cross the street if I was walking towards them at night, or might call the police on me for any one of these like sort of Karen situations that we see about on social media. And so I'm kind of torn because it's like, yes, I'm glad you support it. And I think it's important to have that support be like part of popular culture and, ostensibly in the majority. But also it's like, well, what are you doing? You're kind of diluting the value of the movement through performative activism.
Well, it's so nuanced. I don't know if you'll decide for another 50 years. I don't know if I will. I mean, one thing it makes me think about is, well, let's take the statue on the Brattleboro Commons. We've had this. I mean, that statue on the Brattleboro Commons, it's a bit like the town of Brattleboro having Black Lives Matter in its Instagram bio. That statue sort of represent values of the Civil War, which included freedom and equality for all people. And it gets us into a conversation. We can have a conversation with the town of Brattleboro and say, hey, you have the statue up, which we think represents certain values, but it's not doing that. So can we talk? And that's an opening. Maybe if someone has BLM in their bio and then they act in a way that's more racist, whether it's conscious or unconscious, and they get called out on that. Hey, you have BLM in your bio, and then you did this other thing over here that's feels racist. That's an opening for a conversation where someone can be held to account and maybe learn something. I mean, I put myself in that position where made, I've written articles and made some public stances around racism, and I fully expect to and would like to be held account to myself. And I've asked you directly to do this, Sage. Like, if I'm making statements um, in support of equality and social justice, well, I damn well better be held to it myself.
Yeah, I think it's important for white people to realize that it's not just like a, our problem. Speaking as like a black man, it's, it's a problem for everybody. Uh, I think America should hold itself accountable to its own ideals. Um, if you're proud to be in this country, to benefit from its institutions, its ideas, uh, even if you don't think you have certain privileges, uh, you should support people who think that they've been disadvantaged as a result of institutions and systems that America has promulgated and supported over time.
Yeah. Tell me about your relationship with going to law school, potentially becoming a lawyer. You, we had a conversation recently where you named some people you look up to, such as Barack Obama, Thurgood Marshall, Stacey Abrams, Donald Hollowell, Brian Stevenson, and I believe all those people are African American lawyers, and then have sort of used their stature to maybe affect broader change for equality and justice. Do you see yourself on that kind of path?
Um, well, you asked me what lawyers I admire, so that's why all of those people are lawyers. Um, I would have maybe named some non-lawyers if I could, but I don't want to do that on the fly right now. Um, though Gandhi was a lawyer.
I always forget that about
Uh,
Gandhi. That's incredible.
yeah, it's. I mean, he's not very well known for
But that
practicing
is where he
law.
got his start
Um,
in Africa. And
yeah, and he was kind of racist. I read. He thought that uh, the black people in South Africa were inferior to him, but I think he had some other ideals. Yeah, Gandhi might be canceled eventually. Honestly.
a lot of issues with with him, like any of our heroes, as it turns out.
Yeah, so that also makes me kind of skeptical of the people I named as some of my heroes because who knows? I don't know if I'm on that path, but I'm just happy to be in a position in which right now I feel like I will be able to make a conscious choice in the future as to whether or not I want to, operate within an institution. I don't know. I'm not finished growing yet. I think, you know, you never really are. So I don't know what I'm going to think about life and the world and what I should be doing, um, a couple of years from now. My priorities are probably going to be different whenever I have kids. Did you? What was your thought process when you decided to have a kid?
I think overriding, my biggest thought around it was that this is just an important part of life. This is being a human being. You don't have to have Earth, kids, but to me, I thought about having a child or children as just such a rich experience that to me it was part of how I wanted to kind of live my life as a human being. I think maybe perhaps selfishly, this is an important experience for me, and not selfishly. Well, I think I have something to offer the next generation.
Do you have any feelings about maybe what you hope Felix does in his life?
When I think about his sort of profession or what he does in kind of achievement wise, I don't give a lot of thought to that. I think it's enough for a kid to be a kid and to sort of think about, like looking back on my 20s, I think I've spent a lot of my 20s making myself into a good 30-year-old. And that's maybe not always the most constructive thing. I think I could have benefited from less structure, more freedom, more room for discovery, travel. I would say I would encourage that in younger people. So I see myself encouraging that for him. The thing I think about most with Felix is I just want him to feel comfortable in his own skin and kind of at the phrase I use is that I want him to feel at ease in the world. And that's a projection, by the way, because that's how I would like to feel. And that's not how I have felt through a lot of my life. So a lot of parenting is through projection. And what kind of childhood do we want to have? How do we want to feel? And then we sort of try to give that to our kids. I think there's a mistake that's made a lot of the time where if we don't recognize that projection, we sort of think we're doing this for our kids, but it's for ourselves and our own comfort. Maybe it's an obvious example where kids are encouraged to achieve, and in part that's, yeah, it's good to achieve, but is the achievement mindset encouraged by parents who want to feel good about, oh, I've given my kid a good opportunity in life um, because look at where they got to, and I can talk about my kid to my friends and feel proud. I'm guilty of that where I have, as a parent, at times focused on my son and focused on what do I want him to feel while I didn't have that same feeling myself. So when I say I want him to feel at ease in the world, I have spent a fair amount of time doing things to try to give him that while not experiencing that myself. And I've changed my behavior quite a bit to focus a lot more on where do I want to be feeling good and to feel those things. And I've noticed that it's much more natural that he picks up that and embodies that if I'm doing it.
Yeah, no, it sounds like you're doing an amazing job. Yeah, and I think the Brattleboro statue is a great example of that. I think you're setting a great example for Felix. Um, I don't. I think there are a lot of perspectives on the googly eyes thing. I don't know if that's how I would have gone about a protest. I'm not going to speculate on how I would have done something differently. But the fact that you are teaching Felix to think about that kind of stuff, um, I think is really important. And telling him teaching him to take action when he sees something wrong. Your desire for him to feel at ease in the world is exactly. I think that's what every parent wants, and it's especially in the Black community. That's what mothers want, or at least what my mom wanted for me. But part of the issue is that in order to feel at ease in the world, instead of having me sort of be free to be myself, part of the fight is just, and this gets to the sort of fundamental core of Black Lives Matter, is teaching me just to survive in a world dominated by, uh, you know, whether explicit or sort of implied uh, oppressive majority. Like, we want our children to be happy, we want our children to be at ease, and there's this great burden on Black parents and Black kids in which you have to sacrifice aspects of yourself in order to almost put white people at ease. Uh, so the way you're teaching your kid to just engage with the world, you are teaching them to sort of have these theoretical shackles on, so that they can, again, put somebody else at ease, just so that they can be at all.
I think, well, when I think about you and the some of the things you talked about earlier, I'm just really happy that you've had the opportunities that you've had. I feel like that makes your life bigger and you've had a chance to grow through these all these opportunities. And the thing that makes me the saddest is those times when maybe you feel like you've had to make yourself smaller. Not, you're not a threat to anyone, but you sort of have to make yourself maybe look smaller or safer to appear knowing that other people see you as a threat. And that feels like a boxing yourself into a smaller version of who you could be. And I think we all have versions of that. I know my son has been, he's been bullied in school, um, just because there are bullies in school, and they find people to target, and that can be. And then you are being a young black man. There's certain ways in which you can be targeted for bullying of different kinds, or targeted just as being seen a certain way, and you need to keep yourself safe.
Mhm. How do you? This is something I was thinking about a couple of days ago. But how would you deal, and how do you deal with like somebody bullying your kid?
Number one is most of the time I'm going to hear about it from him. So, oh, how what happened? How was school today? What happened? Oh, this is what happened. Or I might not hear about it from him because kids don't necessarily share what's happened. So maybe I'll hear about it from the teacher or from another parent. I think the first response I have is just to witness the experience. Say, hey, he described something that happened that was hard. Oh gosh, that sucks. you know, I think that's number one is just seeing someone's gone through a hard experience. I think there's a great power in that. If I'm describing a difficult experience to someone else, I don't necessarily want them to solve it for me or give advice or any of that. I think the number one thing I want is to just be seen.
Yeah. How did you? Is there a solution? Like, what's Felix gonna do?
I mean, I'm thinking back to something that happened in his school a couple of years ago where he was being bullied and then also he was acting out in some ways that was, I don't know if I would describe it as bullying, but it was, let's say he was irritating the other kids with his behavior and maybe making his behavior was not making him friends, let's say. Part of my response was to talk to the other parents, say, hey, I've heard that this is happening between my kid and your kid. I just want you to know that we're aware of it and we care about it. Care about my kid, I care about your kid. Again, there's a lot of power just in naming something, saying, hey, this is happening, this is real. Um, and what's the next step? The next step in this case was we had a play date with some of the kids outside of school. School can be very stressful. So get together outside of school in a different setting where you can be more yourself, not be around some of the people that might trigger you, and deepen those relationships. I just believe also not demonizing. I think that well, I just wrote about this. I think it's published on the blog today. Hurt people hurt people. So I see someone that's being hurtful. I don't demonize them. I see, well, okay, how are they being hurt, or how were they hurt? How are they kind of replicating behavior that they were taught? And maybe what they need most of all is that same thing I just talked about, to be witnessed, to be told that their experience is valid, um, told that, or just to have a feeling of that. And then they may be able to be more able to put down their bullying ways.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. Sounds like some of the stuff we're taught in law school. Um, we did take a negotiation class, and one of the lessons that we learned was just, if things get heated, uh, make sure the other side feels heard, because if they don't think that you're listening to them, you're not going to get anywhere. Um, but that's just a really small, specific example. I think what you're talking about is more of an approach to life, which I think is extremely valuable.
Sage, there's more things on my list I want to ask you about or share, but maybe this is getting to a good place to wrap up for today. Um, do you have anything you would like to ask me or add or share with our audience before we wrap up? Including, I love that you mentioned the Martin Luther King letter. Is there anything you'd like people to be aware of or consider as they go about their lives?
Um, I didn't prepare any like last words of wisdom, and I don't know how to tie Martin Luther King into this. I do think one thing I've noticed um, is, and I guess it's related to what we were just talking about, but it just seems like people aren't really hearing each other anymore. One thing I did right after I graduated from Emory, I worked on a podcast called Buried Truths with one of my professors, and what we did was like research unsolved racially motivated murders that occurred in Georgia during the civil rights era. But then I think in February 2020, Ahmaud Arbery was murdered in Georgia. And that didn't really come to light until May 2020. So then we kind of shifted gears and we researched, developed a third season of Buried Truths that was based on the Ahmaud Arbery killing, murder. Um, and that was a really interesting experience. One of the things I did was I interviewed the man, his name is Alan Tucker, who he didn't take the video, but he is the person who leaked the video from Roddy Bryant's cell phone of Ahmaud Arbery actually being shot by Travis McMichael. And that's sort of what caused the case, which was previously not even being investigated, to sort of resurface. It went viral, and then that's what led to the eventual murder conviction for the people that murdered Ahmaud Arbery. And now they're also facing federal charges for perpetrating a hate crime. Um, and I thought Alan Tucker had leaked the video because he saw what everybody else saw, that Ahmaud Arbery was murdered unjustly. He was just jogging in a neighborhood, and these guys just ambushed him because they didn't think a black man belonged there, and then they killed him. So I was expecting to have a conversation about sort of those wrongs with Alan Tucker, but then, to my surprise, he had the opposite view. Uh, he was friends with the McMichaels and Roddy Bryant, and he leaked the video because he thought it showed the opposite, that Travis McMichael shot Ahmaud Arbery in self-defense, and he was saying he didn't think the McMichaels were racist at all, and that he just wanted to show the video because he wanted to show the truth, which was that they did nothing wrong, and he thought that Ahmaud Arbery was being suspicious and he shouldn't have been running there, I guess. And a lot of what Alan Tucker was saying, a lot of what he said was really troubling to me. But I continued our dialogue. And he was a lawyer. I didn't even know I was going to be in law school eventually at that point in time. So it was sort of like this like dance we were playing where like I wanted to keep asking him questions to get him to keep talking about this because we were going to use the audio as part of the podcast. But I also had some like personal issues with it, obviously, because I disagreed with pretty much everything he was saying. But I didn't want to like show my personal views to him and kind of turn it into like a debate. But throughout all of that, I think what was important was that I kept just saying like, I understand what you're saying, not necessarily I agree with you. But I hear you, what you were just saying. And that's what kept the dialogue going. And it turned into, eventually we put it in the podcast. I think it was, one of the highlights of that whole season, and it won a couple of awards. Not that that really matters. But one of the highlights of that process was just talking to Alan Tucker, who honestly kind of upset me, but just engaging with somebody who has different views. And I don't think there's enough of that anymore. I think we just kind of shut people out,
Yeah.
cancel people because they have views that are different from us. And I think it's important to engage with one another. In his letter from a Birmingham jail, Martin Luther King, I think, made a really great argument that, if any like racist person. It wasn't addressed to the racists who kind of put him in jail in Birmingham, but he just sort of spelled out their arguments really effectively, not through hate, through kind of like a understanding, even though he was vehemently opposed to their views. And I just think that civil engagement is really important.
I agree, and I think in situations as mundane as Twitter, sometimes I see something I agree with, or even just I might not agree with it, but I find it interesting enough or provocative enough to amplify it. I want to retweet this, I want to like this, or even something I disagree with, but I want to engage with, I want to ask questions. And pretty much every time I get in that situation, I have some fear. Okay, if this touches on, let's say, racism, or it touches on Trump, it touches on masking or vaccines. I mean, so many issues are kind of hot button polarized issues, and I mean, I'm not speculating. Like I remember retweeting something that I thought was funny, and I thought I agreed with it on something pretty mundane. I think it was about Tide Pods and eating Tide Pods. It was sort of a joke. I thought, this is funny, a funny joke. And then my girlfriend at the time said, you might want to delete that tweet, or the person you whose account that was from looks like they're a Trump or looks like they're a racist. I was like, ooh, and I think I did. But that makes me really uncomfortable if I sort of need to like take it to the extreme, sort of like vet someone's entire social media history or bio before I engage with them. I just don't know if I don't think that's the country that we're meant to be in. I think dialogue is important. I mean, maybe not, but that dialogue you had with this gentleman made you very uncomfortable. Talking to a racist. Oh, I talked to a racist today. Now, did you get more racist from that conversation, or did he get less racist, or neither? But it was sort of like, I think there's a feeling of if you talk to a racist and you sort of that might look bad for you. It sounds weird for me to say that out loud, but I know it's been true. I know this has happened to me in my life. And I think you are brave for having those conversations, and I appreciate you voicing the importance of that. And I want to look up that podcast episode. Well, Sage Mason, thank you for this conversation today. I know I've really appreciated it and enjoyed your perspective. I think our listeners will as well. And I look forward to more conversations with you in the future, and good luck with the upcoming rest of your semester right now in law school. And we're going to stay tuned to what you get up to in the next 50 years.
Cool. Thank you so much, Tristan. Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
This podcast is made possible by Grant from Your Mama's So Kind. She got a third booster so she could stay home from work just to record this with you. Also made possible by Turner Andres, sound editing.
Just to be clear, it sounds like Tristan was recording this in the back of his car with his phone inside of a microwave. So to all of Tristan's listeners, please don't hold me liable for the audio quality of this clip. Thank you. I promise I'm good at audio editing.
And he came up with the theme music.
Oh, Turner.
Wow.
Mixed with music from yours truly, Junker Pork, Mel Garbus, Felix Roberts, and Turner Andres. Thank you to my family for making all this possible. Thank you to you for listening. So also, you can support this podcast, my writing, and other projects that we're doing here on the farm by going on to patreon.com, search for Quillnook Farm. I want to thank today each and every one of my Patreon patrons who already does that. If you like this podcast and want to sponsor it or collaborate in any way, you can reach me at Tristan@thisspotonearth.com. Have an awesome sunset, too.
Called my sister-in-law, the machine picked up. What does he need coming back from Europe? I wanna recommend an acupuncturist, but I'm sure my advice would be dismissed. You wanna